In the spring of 1866, on a cotton plantation along the Big Black River in Mississippi, the girl was still small enough to be overlooked. Most days, she moved where she was told, head lowered, hands busy, her presence fading into the background like dust on the floorboards. That was how she survived. Not by hiding, but by seeming harmless. She learned early that sound carried farther than footsteps. Words spoken carelessly in the shade of the gin house could travel all the way to the quarters. Overseers believed silence meant ignorance. They spoke freely around her, forgetting she was there, forgetting that a child could understand patterns. Even when she did not understand every word, she watched how the men rode in at dawn and left before sundown. She noticed which overseer drank too early in the day, which one counted the sacks twice, which one never checked the far rows after noon. She learned that anger came quickly to some men and slowly to others, and that slow anger was the more dangerous kind. Her work kept her close to the main house. She carried water, swept porches, and mended cloth. These tasks gave her time to listen, time to see. She learned that authority depended less on strength than on routine. When the routine faltered, even for a moment, confusion followed. She remembered everything, not because she meant to use it, but because memory was safer than questions. Asking why brought trouble, remembering did not. When punishments came, she noticed how blame was chosen, not by guilt, but by convenience. When food went missing, it was never the man who counted poorly who suffered. It was the child who had been nearby. Her quietness unsettled people. Adults prefer fear they can see. Tears, shouting, pleading. Her stillness offered none of that. When spoken to harshly, she answered softly and only when required. When struck, she did not flinch in advance. She waited. Over time, small things began to change. Tools left unattended went missing for a day and reappeared where they would be found. Work slowed in ways no one could accuse. Mistakes happened that had no clear hand behind them. Nothing that could be named. Nothing that could be proven. The overseers began to notice her. Not as a child, but as a presence. They could not say what troubled them, only that when she was nearby, order felt less certain. It was not rebellion they sensed. It was awareness. And in a place built on control, a child who saw too much was more dangerous than one who ran. By late summer of 1867, something had gone wrong that no one could neatly explain. A full day's tally came up short. 3 sacks of cotton unaccounted for. The loss was small, almost ordinary, but the timing was not. Federal agents had been rumored nearby since the war's end, and every mistake felt heavier under watchful air. Someone had to be blamed, and quickly. They chose the girl because she was close at hand. No witness named her. No hand pointed outright. Yet, when the overseer spoke, his words leaned toward certainty without proof. She was near the shed. She was seen late. She is too quiet. In that place, quietness itself could be shaped into guilt. When they told her, she listened as she always had. She did not argue. She did not explain where she had been, though she knew the hour by the sun's position, and could have spoken the truth plainly. Experience had taught her that truth mattered less than timing, and this was not a moment that wanted truth. The men gathered early, before the heat settled in. The plantation was still, the air carrying a weight that made even the birds pause between calls. Orders were given with practiced formality, as though repeating familiar words might make the act less uncertain. What unsettled them was not her resistance, but the lack of it. She walked where she was directed. Her steps were steady. She did not look at the ground, nor did she stare anyone down. Instead, her eyes moved slowly, deliberately, taking in details, the way one man shifted his stance, the way another avoided meeting her gaze. It felt, to some, like being counted. The attempt itself was meant to be final and instructive, a lesson to others. But it did not go as planned. Not because of intervention or courage from onlookers, but because of error, haste, perhaps, or carelessness born of assumption. What should have been certain became confused, then halted. In the silence that followed, no one spoke. The overseer's authority, so carefully maintained, had failed in front of witnesses. That failure mattered more than the girl's life in that moment. When it was over, she lay still, breathing shallow but present. The men stepped back, unsure who should act next. No one wanted responsibility for what had already gone wrong. She was carried away and left under watch, not as a survivor, but as an unfinished matter. Word spread quickly, not of mercy but of embarrassment, of an order given and not completed, of a child who had been condemned and yet remained. From that day forward, the overseers no longer spoke with the same ease when she was near. Something had shifted. Authority had shown its weakness, and the girl, silent, observant, had seen it happen. The first attempt did not break her. It exposed them. After the first attempt failed, no order was written, yet a change settled over the plantation like a held breath. The girl was alive, but she no longer occupied the same place in people's minds. She had crossed, without meaning to, from punishment into uncertainty, and uncertainty frightened men who depended on rules. At first, it showed in small refusals. One overseer claimed his leg troubled him, and asked to be reassigned away from the fields where she worked. Another said he had no authority over children and passed his duties to someone else. Their reasons differed, but their eyes told the same story. No one wished to be the one responsible for her again. They did not speak of fear openly. Fear was not a word men like them used. Instead, they spoke of ill feeling, of bad order, of how things went wrong whenever she was near. They spoke as if the plantation itself resisted them, rather than admitting their own confidence had thinned. The girl noticed everything. She saw how conversations stopped when she entered a space, how keys were checked twice, how voices lowered, even when no reprimand followed. No one struck her now, not out of kindness, but out of caution. It was as though touching her might invite the same mistake that had already stained one man's authority. Her work changed. She was sent to tasks no one wanted. Clearing brush at the edge of the land, carrying water alone, tending places where no supervision lingered long. Distance became their solution. If she was kept apart, perhaps the unease would not spread. But distance did not erase memory. At night, whispers moved through the quarters. Not praise, not legend, just quiet acknowledgement she lived. That was all. No one claimed to know why. And that uncertainty, shared softly, carried more weight than explanation ever could. What troubled the overseers most was not that she had survived, but that she had witnessed their failure and said nothing about it. She did not accuse. She did not remind. Her silence forced them to remember on their own. They watched her from afar and searched for defiance, but found none. She followed instructions. She worked steadily. She offered no sign of triumph. That absence unsettled them more than rebellion would have. A rebel could be punished. A quiet witness could not be undone. Gradually, a rule formed without being spoken. She was to be left alone unless absolutely necessary. Not protected, not spared, simply avoided. In a place built on command, avoidance was an admission. The girl had not threatened anyone. She had not raised her voice or her hand. Yet through patience and watchfulness alone, she had altered the behavior of those who believed themselves untouchable. And that, more than any act of resistance, marked the beginning of their fear. By November of 1867, patience had worn thin among those who still believed authority must always appear complete. Avoidance had failed to restore order. The girl's continued presence, quiet, observant, unchanged, stood as a daily reminder that a command once given had not been carried through. For men who measured power by obedience, this unfinished matter became unbearable. The decision was made privately, without the noise of earlier certainty. No gathering, no audience meant to learn a lesson. This time they would not risk error or hesitation. The problem, as they saw it, was not the girl herself, but the doubt she inspired. And doubt, once allowed to live, spread. She was taken from her work without explanation. The air was colder now. The fields stripped bare after harvest. Even the land seemed to have withdrawn into itself. She walked as she was told, her steps slower than before, her body still bearing the quiet weakness of what had come earlier. Yet her eyes remained clear. Those present spoke little. Their restraint was not mercy. It was calculation. Each man involved wished to be able to say later that he had only followed instruction. That responsibility lay elsewhere. Authority, when uncertain, seeks many hands so that blame may be shared. What unsettled them again was her composure. She did not ask why this was happening. She did not struggle. Instead, she looked carefully at each face, as if marking them into memory a second time. One man shifted his stance under that gaze. Another cleared his throat and looked away. The second attempt was meant to erase the first, to restore the order that had slipped. But once more, certainty failed them. Whether through hesitation, misjudgment, or the quiet interference of conscience no one would admit to, the act did not conclude as intended. When it was stopped, no voice claimed credit for stopping it. The girl lived, barely, but undeniably. This time the silence afterward was heavier. No one argued. No one spoke of trying again. What had begun as punishment now threatened to become confession. To continue would be to admit error openly, and that risked more than one life. It risked the fragile authority that held the plantation together. She was returned not to punishment, but to neglect. From that day forward, her existence was acknowledged only in necessity. Orders were delivered from a distance. Eyes followed her movements without approaching. The men who once claimed absolute control now acted as though proximity itself carried danger. The second attempt did not end her life. It ended their certainty. And in a world where power depended on appearing unchallenged, uncertainty proved more devastating than defiance ever could. After the second attempt, the girl became a presence that no overseer dared touch. She moved through the quarters and fields with the same quiet patience, performing tasks no one else wished to do, always observed, always noted. The men who once thought themselves untouchable now avoided her gaze, gave orders from afar, and whispered her name only when necessary. Her survival was not celebrated. It was an unspoken verdict. The plantation carried on around her, yet the air seemed heavier when she passed, as if every man remembered the failures they had endured in silence. She listened, remembered, and endured, small acts of defiance hidden in plain sight. Her quiet endurance became a testament, not of triumph, but of presence. A life that could not be erased, a witness that could not be silenced. Years later, long after the overseers had left or passed, her story lingered in the empty fields, in the way the sun struck the cotton, in the hush of the quarters at dawn. Memory itself became her companion, and silence her shield. Even now, one could imagine the faint echo of her steps, measured and certain, reminding the land that she had lived. Though no one dared speak her name aloud, this story is a work of fiction inspired by historical contexts and is not presented as a verified historical account.